Most financial advisors follow the industry playbook. Elite advisors choose a different path. I'm Sten Morgan. Welcome to the Elite Financial Advisor Podcast, where top advisors share the strategies, mindsets, and the stories behind building a better business, adding more value, and the courage to grow through resistance. Because becoming an elite advisor is not about working harder and longer. It's about choosing a better path.
So I got a checkup there, and unfortunately they diagnosed me with stage 4 cancer and 6 months to live. Pretty damning diagnosis. And that was the beginning of a turning point. But then it was also my son reminding me, what was I doing, what happens to the 9 out of 10? And the problem that we had, that my son Thomas outlined right back then without realizing he was outlining it, is that if you've got a business and you don't do anything, you probably end up keeping between 2.5 and 3.5 when you sell it. Because the leakage that you suffer is all the professional advisors that you need to help you sell a business, plus the tax man.
Welcome to this episode of the Elite Financial Advisor Podcast. My name's Sten Morgan. I'm your host. I'm a financial advisor, just like most of you listening. Today, we're going to hang out with Marc Adams. Marc has a very unique business, a great story on how he ended up where he is. But how can we as advisors, I want you to be thinking about your business owner clients or your business owner prospects, how can we understand them better? How can we educate ourselves so we can coach them through an exit of their business? What are the levers they can pull to make their business more valuable? So I love this conversation with Marc as we get into the nuance of how do people sell their business? The fact that 9 out of 10 business owners never do sell, even if they try to, because they can't get the money they want to out of it. So great episode here with Marc. Let's dive in. Marc, thanks for being here, buddy.
Sten, thank you for having me, buddy. It's a pleasure to finally meet you.
You bet. Yeah. We were just talking soccer. I'm a newer fan to the game, obviously with everything that's going on right now. But I think you guys might have a little better odds than we do right now.
Well, I'm predicting we're going to win. Yeah, we got to get round Argentina. Then we got to get round Spain or France. But if we can play like we did in the second half of the last game, then we could do it. So no one else is predicting it. Well, they probably are, but I'm predicting here on the show, we're going to win. So in a couple of weeks' time, you can come back to me and go, you can either come back to me and go, amazing foresight, or you can come back to me and go, you're an idiot, Marc. But we'll see.
Just a loyal fan. That's right. All right. So let's talk business owners. So everybody listening, financial advisors, somehow in the financial strategy field, I'm an active financial advisor, so I love to hang out with other advisors. And what I've learned is the business owner space is pretty intimidating. The idea of serving a business owner is great. There's usually more assets to manage, more complex problems to solve. But I'd love for you to share with the listeners your path into what you help business owners with now. And then I'm going to try to get in your head and say, teach us to understand business owners and to communicate with them better.
Yeah, well, I can only speak from what it is that we do, in the hope that a piece of that might provide a hook or something that some of your audience could use. So if I start with framing what it is that we do, and then I'll take you back to how we started that, because it's somewhat unique. So what we do is help a business owner double the value of their business in less than 6 months without them having any equity dilution, which is unique in its own right, without them having any debt service, because they're not borrowing any money to grow, and without them signing any PGs. So immediately, if any of your audience were to talk to a founder and say, we can do this, they'd want to know how, because it's a very unusual, never heard it before proposition. It's so good, it's got to be a scam, but it isn't. Now, how we got to that was, if I take you back to 2020, we were beginning to, we knew that COVID was starting to come along. With the January 2020, it was being heard about. Increasingly, we went into lockdown January, February, right? So unfortunately for me, through that lockdown, as we came to October, November of that year, we had this opportunity to start going out in little tiny groups. It was just the very beginning of releasing people a little bit, but there were no vaccines in at that time. So while we were going through that, I went in for a quick check because in the UK, we get private medical as a privilege. And so the hospitals weren't being used for COVID that were private. So I got a checkup there. And unfortunately, they diagnosed me with stage 4 cancer and 6 months to live. Pretty damning diagnosis. So I went through, if you roll forward to January, the only thing they could do was take it out in the hope that it might give me a few more months. When you got a young family, you'd fight when you're in that situation for another day. So went through that pre the vaccines, and I got COVID as well, the original strain. Turns out they think that the original strain of COVID that I got was what cured me of the cancer. Go figure that if you can. And I'll get to that in a bit. But as I'm going through that, I'm out of hospital. I'm at home. I'm looking out over green fields on one side of me through the bedroom window. On the other side, we've got, the dressing room, the ensuite, and a door in the corner, big old TV on the wall. And then the door in the corner is where, the family people come in and out. And my young son, Thomas, who was then 10, he's now 15, would come in and out every single morning because he's in lockdown as well. We were all in lockdown. For schools in the UK, we didn't know what to do. So lockdown for him was Xbox every day. So he had a great time. But he was hearing the same news. He was hearing the same news reports, Sten, that you and I were getting on the number of new infections and deaths every single day. So one day through that period, I'm running a business, so I'm still working, even though I'm in recovery, even though I might have only 28 days. I was told I had 6 months, but when we got that original strain of COVID, none of us knew what was going on. And if you got it, you knew you were on a 12 to 28 day cycle, but you didn't know where it was going. So going through that, and we're talking about Xbox every day, except one day he came in and he said, who was that? Because I'd been on a call. It was about 4:30. It was early morning West Coast. And I was talking to a friend of mine, who was now a friend of mine, a business acquaintance at the time called Angela. And we were looking at a business that we'd been trying to buy, but the price the owner needed was so much more than they could get in the market. There's a reason for that. So we couldn't do anything with it. So Thomas, rather than teaching me more Xbox stuff and I'm the world's worst Xbox player, was, who was that? So I said, it was Angela. We were talking about a business. And, typically it's one that we want to buy, but we can't because it's too much. So he just threw out, so why is it too much? And he said, well, the owners need too much. And 9 out of 10 of them never sell. These are my words, paraphrasing his. And so he said, well, what happens to the 9? Those are his words. To which I said, the dream of owning a business sometimes becomes the prison for them. He said, what happens to the 9 if they don't sell? I said, I don't know. He said, well, what happens to the mums and dads if they get COVID and die? Who's going to look after their families? Because he's not money motivated or money oriented. I was, less so now as a result of this. And I had no answer for him, Sten. And there began a pivot, not right at that moment. 10-year-old kids, don't forget. So I'm obviously recovering from cancer. 3 months later, I'm back at my consultant. And the good news was they couldn't find the cancer. The bad news, he thought, great news for me, was they had no idea why. So, but what they think was that my immune system kicked in because I'm on all sorts of vitamins and minerals because I'm a bit of a health nut. And I was in a gym. I was in a good position to fight. Turns out your immune system does a great job of fighting some forms of cancer. And that was the beginning of a turning point. But then it was also my son reminding me, what was I doing? What happens to the 9 out of 10? That eventually led to a book called The Secrets to 10Xing Your Business Cashing Out Tax-Free. That's become a bestseller, got featured at Times Square. Fast forward, that led to me speaking, podcast and stage, and investors approaching me wanting to help. And that led to this particular problem. And the problem that we had that my son Thomas outlined right back then without realizing he was outlining it is that if you've got a business, let's say it's worth 1 million or 3 million or 5 million, but we'll just pick 5 million for this conversation, and you don't do anything, you probably end up keeping between 2.5 and 3.5 when you sell it, because the leakage that you suffer is all the professional advisors that you need to help you sell a business, plus the tax man. You've got to pay them as well, right? And it's a global issue. And the reason why so many companies don't sell and they can become a bit of a prison is because the business owners suddenly realize right at the end, in the 6 months leading up to a sale, that all these fees are going out of the business and it's not going to leave them enough, so they can't sell it because they've still got bills to pay. The dream retirement they thought they were going to get becomes a bigger, it's still a dream because they're stuck with it. So we started to figure out ways in which we can help. Fast forward, there's a lot that we've done, but now what we do on the double and exit side is we'll double the value of the business in 6 months without them having to be diluted, without them having to do any debt service, without them having to do any PGs. Because the whole goal in what I now see as a broken private equity venture capital business funding system worldwide is to give owners more of what they built, not give it to everybody else. That's not to say that you don't pay your tax. You should pay your tax and you should pay your fees. But it's just been organized in a way that if you don't have enough after all the fees you need to pay out, we've got to increase the value. So how can we do that? So what we've been lucky enough to do is find ourselves in a position now where we're supported by several billion of family office money, several hundred million of private credit and acquisition finance, which we use to bring business owners together, and we'll buy them to form a bigger group. But we do that specifically because we have a buyer ready to acquire them from us. Money loves speed, and business owners need more money. So there's two on the double and exit side of it. We'll use the capital that we're aligned to, not give the owners the capital because they're going to go to Puerto Rico on holiday, Stan. You know it, right? So we don't give it to the business owners. Yeah. We'll use it to group it so that we've got, and the reason for that is if you've got a business that's doing $500,000 in EBITDA or $1 million in EBITDA, it's worth whatever it's worth, but it's worth so much more as part of a bigger group. So they can all do this themselves, but it will take them 7 years and then 2 years to package and sell. Plus, they have to give up PGs and they have to raise money and they have to do all of that stuff. And many of them are not in a position to raise the money fast enough to get to where they want to go, which is why we come in and we're able to do that and raise the cash. So we've already raised the cash and build the group on the basis that it's got a bigger multiple, a bigger valuation as a group. So if you've got a CPA firm that's worth $500,000, and I can get 10 of those together at $2.5 million, the individual firm is probably worth $600,000. And you could argue with me and say, no, it's not, it's worth 800 or 900. It's not worth 5 million. But, 10 of them together at 5 million value is probably a 15 to 20 million valuation. And CPA is not a good example. They're valued a slightly different way, but most industries, those numbers will apply. So if you divide that back, instead of them getting $500,000, you can return a couple of million to them. So that makes a massive difference. Now, the other thing that we can do is structure them. So if you organize them in the right way, they may well be able to pay a lot less in fees, and they might be able to pay less in tax as well, not always. And that's variable to every single individual. So we went out and built a load of software that people can access and figure this out for themselves. And bringing it back to your audience of financial advisors, in just talking about the double and exit framework, which we're just pushing a lot more marketing behind now because we've done all this organically, it's a unique conversation starter that might lead to something else. And we've found that the insurance side of the advisory network love us because actually, think about this. If you're a business that's worth 5, you do nothing and sell for 3, and I give all of that to somebody that can invest it in, say, insurance products. It's very, very safe investments, principal protected, maybe, and a rate of return on the money you got at the pot. Well, 3 million doesn't get you as much money as 10 million. So if we're doubling from 5 to 10 and we help them keep as much as 90%, which we can't always do, all of a sudden there's 9 million going in, which over a 7-year period, which will be doubled up. So the insurance agents are loving us right now because we're able to facilitate a much larger sum of money, which their customers may choose to invest with them. There's no guarantees they will, right? So we're really breaking up the way that businesses are bought, sold, and valued around the world. But you've got to get into the mindset of an owner with something that will add value, and that adds value. Even if they don't do it, it's a conversation starter, and where they go from there, I couldn't tell you.
Yeah. Why do you think most business owners are not aware of the 9 out of 10 don't actually sell? I bet for a lot of advisors, I know the business owners I work with, if left to their own, they're pretty optimistic. They're pretty risk tolerant. They'd say like, oh, when I need to sell, I will. I think I'm doing fine. And maybe most advisors are not initiating this conversation early on, like, hey, you could keep your business and give it to your kids, but what if they didn't want it? What does the transaction look like? Help us understand the status quo better, like this broken system that people are kind of somewhat okay with, even though it's broken. And then what you're proposing is like something different.
Yeah, so I don't think they are okay with it. I think it's even worse. I don't think they're aware of it. So when you're running a business as a business owner and you're doing really well, you're serving your community, you're making a bunch of profit, you don't start thinking about this until you get to a point where, for some reason, you might want to make an exit. And that's when it's just not much education out there that people in the SME space, let's call that $500,000 in profit up to, well, I've got clients doing 20 million in EBITDA and they're not even aware of it. So they're just not aware. And you start putting it in front of them, they go, oh my God. And the next big thing is they think, well, we'll start tackling this in 3 or 4 years when we think we're ready to sell. And then the next big thing is they get right up to the wire of the business is ready to, and all the paperwork is ready, the due diligence has been done, the sale and purchase agreement's been put together. They just need to sign it, and they change their minds at the last minute. Because in many of those instances, they fear the unknown. We spend a lot of time with business owners helping them begin to see what life looks like when they've left this thing they built for the last 20 or 30 years. Because for them, suddenly making that change and not going to the office tomorrow is a reason why they change their minds and not sell, and don't sell a thing at all. And so why we get to a position where there's very little monetary-based financial education available to business owners, I have no idea. But what I'm talking to you about is not the domain of a financial advisor. That is not necessarily, the number one thing that they're talking to owners about. And even when I talk about it in the regards to, are you aware of, I need something very compelling to get them to move. And what we've got that's compelling is we can double the value of it without you having to give up any of it or service any debt. But if our capital runs out, it runs out. So if this is something that motivates you and you're excited by, you better start moving on it now. And people there's just not enough education around, Stan. And it's not a US problem, my friend. It's global.
Sure. Is it fair to assume that most business owners sell based on some like triggering event where they're kind of rushed into it? Or do a lot of business owners think about this years in advance, start planning? What's been your experience?
It's a bit of a mix. So they do begin to. So I look at different groups. So there's the 20s to 30s, 30s to 40s, 50 to 60s, and 60s and beyond. 55 is a trigger point for we might retire. Definitely. Somewhere between 30 and 45, bulletproof, we've still got a few more turns in us. We're not necessarily going to, we're not thinking about doing anything. 20 to 30s is very different. Two of the youngest people I work with, one of them is a young man of 25 years old. We've just arranged his first tranche of finance to buy a wealth management business. He's 25. And so he hasn't got to put any of the money in, and he's not going to do any PGs. And his whole way of thinking is the end game. He wants the money for the house and the school fees for a girlfriend he hasn't even got by the time he's 30. And then the youngest person I'm working with is 20, who when he was 15 was in trouble with the police. He was smoking dope and doing other sorts of drugs. He was one step away from the wrong path in jail. Now he's turned himself around and he's in the digital economy, and he's making $20,000 in profit in his pocket each month at the moment. What a transformation that young man's got. And he's going through the same things. He wants the basic. He's turned his back on university because for him it's not serving a purpose fast enough. And he's building cash to buy the house and do the school fees for a girlfriend he never thinks he wants, let alone hasn't got. So the point I'm making in the youngsters in the digital economy is they are demonstrating every day ways in which they can make very large sums of money from all sorts of things digital that we find it difficult to comprehend. It's very similar to my parents finding it very difficult to comprehend how much money you could make back in my day when I went into the workplace and computers were coming in and IBM were doing mainframes and the minis were coming out. Compared to what they did, it was life-changing sums of money. We're at that same pivot with the young groups, with the young people now. So those guys are very, very brand savvy, and they're looking to build brands and value and sell out and accumulate that cash. And for them, it's completely normal. Then you've got this void in the middle of the 35 to 45 you got bits in both camps, but 45, definitely is a bit too early, but 55, they're definitely thinking about it. And then the older they get, the more desperate they get about it. So that's when they're thinking and they're planning, and it's age related. But you've got an awful lot of other people that get a little bit older and maybe they've got health issues. Either they or their spouse have got health issues. That triggers a change. What I do try and work with business owners on is not necessarily selling, because some of them are making really good numbers and they think that they need to sell, and then they've got, they might not be interested in the double and exit thing that we can do for them very quickly. But in that scenario, I'll say to them, why don't you bring somebody in and train them up to run the business for you and just take an income from it for the rest of your life, because it's a great asset, right? And surprisingly, they find that a very difficult thing to do, because they still feel that they want to stick their nose in and tell them how to run it. And the people that are running it, want to get on and run it. So it's just different at different ages, but I'm seeing a shift. There's a lot of dynamic shift I wasn't expecting from the stuff that I put out, which comes from the TikTok set, and it's different in the YouTube set in terms of who's that audience and what are they interested in. So I think we're going to see a lot of change, but for the baby boomers, nobody's really helping them improve the value. There's everybody out there helping you grow a business from scratch. Anything in AI is getting money hand over fist from private equity and from VCs these days. But what about all those people that run the white collar, blue collar businesses, all those home services businesses where they're solid businesses making much more modest profits? Who's going to look after those guys? Who's going to minimize their leakage? Who's going to help them pay tax but not pay more tax than they need? Who's going to improve the value of their businesses? Well, they're not doing much on the exit side at all, and nobody's helping them grow it on the valuation side, because we're the only people coming in and saying, we've got the capital, we can help you do this a lot faster if you want to. And so, it's a nightmare. It's not an American issue. It's a global issue.
Yeah. Because we do run into quite often. I had a friend who got consolidated by a VC. He owned a landscaping company. Another owned a pest control company. And so it's like these VCs are like, what industry can we go at? Can they do essentially what you're doing? But to your point, they're the ones that are going to win the most in that scenario, with the bigger exit as they consolidate it.
Yeah, so for the benefit of the audience, here's why they win. So if let's say you're worth 5 million, I'm only picking it because it's easy maths for me, and you've got private equity or venture capital coming in. It's more private equity than VC, but let's either or, right? They're going to come in and say, yeah, we want to invest in you. We're going to build a bigger roll-up. So they may take 50% of your business to give you the cash. So you've gone from a 5 million val to 2.5. Now you've got to double it to get back to where you were before they came in. And you've got to double it again to get ahead of the game and actually double the original position that you've got. And there's lots of people out there that will now say, after 10 years, we brought a VC in 7 years ago, we've just exited. And actually, if you look back on it, I'm no better off now than I was then. So that's the reality of that. So what we've tried to do is something different.
Yeah, the friends of mine that have gone through that process, they're like, I get to roll in more money in the next deal. Like the way it's positioned to them is like, it's a benefit to leave money in this fund because they're going to continue to grow. And like 5 years from now, I'm going to have an even bigger exit. What I'm hearing you say is there's a chance, the good news is they don't have to do the work anymore to make it grow to that extent. Like there's something appealing about that. Maybe you're an exhausted business owner and you're like, I'm just done. So I'm ready to take some cash.
Yeah, so those things do happen, Sten, but more typically what they're doing is a 20% roll. So they'll buy 80% of the business, you'll roll 20% into the new head group code that they're setting up. And if they perform, then your 20% in the new co will probably give you a second bite of the cherry, which will be equal to or nearly equal to what you're cashing out with now, because you're benefiting from the future growth of rolling that in, right? So that's a good thing. Now, normally in that scenario, most businesses do get bought on the owner staying around for a period of time. So they might end up in that 5-year journey being in a position where they're not any longer in the business because they did a 2-year earnout. That's very common, very normal, and owners should expect that. And if then the overall group performs, then they can benefit from that. Beware just now, there's a lot. So if you're in a business that's affected by AI, that may not be the case. So I can't remember the name of it now, but I was reading over the weekend that in the software space, not the landscaping space, I think that's got more protection, and I think AI might even enhance it. Not the home services space, but in the software space, some of the biggest private equity firms are rolling out, are just coming out of their software purchases, and they've lost a lot of money. So you only get that future upside if they deliver on that future upside. What we're looking to try and do is get those owners double where they are, double at no risk, no dilution, no debt in the next 6 to 18 months and out with double the amount of money in their bank account. Sometimes it can be triple, but double the amount of money in their bank account without having to wait that 5, 6, or 7 years for PE or venture capital to wrap it up and then sell it on to someone else that's going to pay more money for it. It's not right for everybody. We're just trying to solve a problem for a lot of business owners, and it does appeal to a lot of smaller companies that private equity are not going to touch. So your friend with a landscaping business, for private equity to be interested, got to a certain size. There's a lot of companies that sit below that maybe make 200,000 in EBITDA. They're a bit too small for private equity. So we're trying to group those guys together as well to give them what they deserve, which is a better exit with more in their bank account. We arrived at, we arrived at this by accident. It was all off the back of a comment that my son made when I had COVID and we were all in lockdown, that I began thinking about it, that led to a book, that led to some podcasts, that led to some speaking, that led to some investment, and that's led to a thing where actually this is a big issue that we're trying to help people resolve fairly quickly. Now, coming back to your audience, why would your audience care? Maybe a lot of them won't, but it just might be something to begin a conversation with that will get some level of intrigue as to, well, how do I double the value of my business without having to give any of it away, without having to sign any PGs, without having to borrow any money? Is that even possible? And that's where we uniquely play.
Yeah, I do think for the advisors listening, a great advisor can have an unbiased conversation and educate somebody on options. And one option is you just walk away from your business. One is you transition it to a key employee or a family member. One is you find an efficient roll-up strategy, which you're mentioning. Then there's, hey, you go to VC or you try to go to a broker and they sell it for you. I think any good advisor that works with business owners should be able to hold a conversation about, here's what this season of your life could look like, and here's all the options on the table. You don't have to be the expert at each one, but I think a great advisor knows about the options that are out there.
Yeah, I totally agree. I absolutely agree. And those options will vary with each advisor according to the business they are advising. Not all businesses are going to have a private equity or a venture capital option. Nearly all businesses will have a broker or a banker, depending on the size of that business. So, brokers are very good resources. What they'll do is focus on packaging the business to get it sold, but there's no value enhancement in that scenario. But, for some people in some companies, that's the right thing to do. And so, it's different strokes for different folks, Stan. But the more options that an owner's got, the better off I think they can be.
Yeah. One real practical step we've taken is that if we have a client that owns a business, as opposed to just putting it as a line item on their balance sheet and treating it like every other asset they have, or trying to lump that conversation into their meeting about all the rest of their financial plan, is have a meeting about their business. Give them 45 minutes to an hour to just only talk about the business. And if they bring up their 401k, hey, we'll talk about that later. My cash flow and budgeting, we'll talk, reserve some time, because that is most likely the greatest asset they have and the most complex asset they have. And I find that a lot of advisors kind of brush over it as they talk about the whole picture, as opposed to saying, no, this deserves a little more time.
Yeah, I agree with you. I do it and suggest it in a very slightly different way, and I like yours a lot. I like to talk to customers about the things they want to talk about with the issues that they're facing right now, meet them with the challenges they most immediately need to solve, and to see if there's anybody I know, because I've got a big network, that I can introduce them to for free that can take care of that issue for them, because it earns a lot of credibility and trust. Then that positions me for a much better conversation about other things that I might want to lead them to that they may not have been ready to hear on the first interaction because they're trying to solve another problem today. So I kind of go that way, and it doesn't always work, but it does normally set me up with an opportunity to come back and keep talking to them about stuff, because you can find a way to help them with something else, even if I'm not making any money from it because I've got a big network. Then they do feel that they're going to want to know more about what you can do for them because you did something for them, and it's unexpected. People don't expect that these days, and so there's a place for us human beings in this world of AI and technology, even now.
Sure, that's right. Yeah, one thing I've found myself doing over the years is if I position something as you thought it was this, but it's actually this, it doesn't get as much pushback or defense. Like if I question someone's decision in the past or the knowledge of their business, like that could create some resistance. But if I'm like, hey, I've learned that we think it's this way. We business owners think that when the time comes, they'll be able to sell their business. Here's what's actually true: 9 out of 10 actually never sell. And so there's like this coach aspect, I think, to our job as advisors to say, you may think this is true, but we at least need to entertain this being true. And if this is true, what does that mean? And we have to be able to talk about it.
Yeah, and I've got a controversial view on why I think we get into that position with business owners and a misalignment of value. A lot of people will tell you that it's a broker telling them that the business is worth more than it is. I don't believe that's true. I think brokers are pretty good for the most part. What I think happens is, in that 6 months of getting prepared to sell a business, when they realize that everybody's is their best friend and wants to get some kind of return for helping them that never helped them before, they realize that what they're actually going to keep is not going to be enough. And that's the assumption that they own the whole business, and often they don't. They're at least in 50-50 split with at least one other person in many, many instances. And then they realize that after taxes and fees, they're not going to have enough. So that drives them asking for more money. And another way to think about that is, think of it like a property. If you put your property on the market today to be sold and it's too cheap, it will sell tomorrow. And if you've got the price about right, within 3 months, you'll be under contract. And if you've overpriced it, it's still on the market a year later. Selling a business is not that much different. If you're still out there after a year, maybe the value's not quite right. And the reason so many of them are out there, I believe, is not because of brokers. I believe it's because, for whatever reason, business owners don't quite realize in many cases how much they're going to lose. In California and in New York, when you account for the fees and the leakage, you will keep 50% of the sale price. That's unbelievable. I think it's wrong and immoral, but that's the way it is. And worse still, Sten, business owners just accept it. They just accept that's the way it's been done. Well, I think we've been lied to. It doesn't have to be that way. So once you start to see that and you realize you can't sell under those circumstances, that's when the dream becomes the prison, because you've got to stay in it because you've got bills to pay. And that's not a broker issue. That's not an owner issue. That's just nobody told them. So then you can start to say, how do we move forward so I can actually, and you do need experts, and you are going to pay some tax. Well, sometimes you don't have to, but let's assume that nearly every time you're going to pay some tax, right? But if you can get that leakage down to about 10%, you're in a much, much better position to enjoy whatever it is you wanted to do next with who you wanted to enjoy it with. That's the lifestyle that these people deserve, that they've not been getting, because it's not that we've been lied to deliberately. It's just the system and the way it was designed came together. And I just don't think it's any longer fit for purpose for most people. I think most of it should go to owners. And the only reason I started thinking about this as a former greedy private equity investor was because my 10-year-old forced me to. And as I started looking into it, I thought, what have I been doing? What is going on here? And that's, so now I've changed my view.
Yeah, I had a friend call it like responsible capitalism. Like capitalism's great, but a lot of systems, if left unchecked, will kind of run away. Yep. And I think you can be upset at it, or you can recognize it's probably not going to go away overnight. But if I can understand it and the rules that are happening, like I can navigate it much better. So
yeah, totally.
Mark, man, absolutely. I appreciate you. This was fun.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to meet you. I hope it's adding some value to your audience.
Definitely. Yeah, we'll link your book in the show notes and all your resources.
Yeah, and if people want to check in and find out a little bit more about what they can do, just hit me up and I'm happy to help.